I know.
Good evening. Good evening. We're on the air. Welcome to the May 10th Planning Policy Commission meeting. First item on the agenda is a quick approval of last meeting minutes. Are there any additions or corrections? A motion to accept the minutes?
I'd like to move to accept the minutes for our last meeting.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Minutes approved.
So, why don't you start?
We're going to have the public hearing. We have a number of things to discuss tonight. Hopefully, we will move quickly. I ask everybody to be patient. I ask you to be respectful when you're talking with other people's maybe differing opinions. We'll try to get everybody a chance to talk. I don't know how many have signed up, but if it starts going on, I will let everybody have 5 minutes to talk when their turn comes at the public hearing, and we'll proceed along that way. We have a municipal regarding the expiration of Talus agreement, and then another town hearing on Old Town Subarea plan, and also the proposed transportation improvement program tonight. So we have a busy agenda. We will proceed with, Lucy's going to run the first part, I guess.
Yes, but we're going to start with the city attorney.
City attorney's going to talk to us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Very briefly, I have a few preliminary comments concerning the Commission's consideration
Is your mic on?
of the Talus development agreement. We are aware of some procedural arguments that have been raised by legal counsel for the owner or developer of the Talus 9 parcel, and this concerns the extent to which tonight's proceedings are legislative versus quasi-judicial in nature, and whether the proposed classification of the Talus 9 parcel constitutes a site-specific rezone under state law. Much of this argument is based upon a decision of the Washington State Supreme Court that was just issued today. Our office is currently reviewing that case with city staff, and we have not yet formulated any final procedural recommendation based upon the potential impact of the Supreme Court's opinion on these proceedings. However, without conceding that these proceedings are in fact quasi-judicial, it is our recommendation that the PPC members receive and undergo the brief appearance of fairness disclosure process that Ms. Sloman will now lead you through.
Good evening, Lucy Sloman, Land Development Manager. This is going to be new to you. You guys don't typically get this. So we're going to go through 3 slides to talk about, go through the quasi-judicial review process. The purpose of this is that a quasi-judicial permit is like a court, and the proceedings need to both be fair and appear fair. In this case, that is predominantly a procedural due process activity. Part of it is around the kind of noticing and other procedural things that we need to follow, but also to ensure and discuss the decision maker or recommender's relationship with any people who benefit from the decision. So I would like you to read through the questions that are up on the screen, and then I will ask you some questions related to them. How many people answer no to all the questions?
What's the definition of own or control property near the subject property?
So the city attorney has mentioned to me that he uses within 300 feet. So if you received a notice,
Okay.
so you would answer no to that?
Yeah, no.
Okay, great. Thank you. And then the other piece of this is ex parte contacts. That would be any conversations amongst commissioners, with the public, with anyone else that were not part of the official record, which would be basically outside of these proceedings. Has anyone talked about this matter outside of these proceedings?
I had a meeting with Chris Ray. He requested that as a way to talk about the fact that this was going to come to PBC. That gave me the ability to get into the research a little bit early, and but I have not made any official decisions prior to coming to this meeting.
Anyone else? Okay, anyone care to challenge the participation of any of the commissioners this evening?
Ms. Sloman, I just wanted to address Commissioner Walsh's disclosure. It's appreciated. The fact that you disclosed the meeting and the substance of it, I believe, addresses the appearance of fairness concerns that the property owner would have. I do ask that because Councilmember Ray is a proponent of the project, that the commissioners not have further meetings with him about it. And I should identify who I am. Yeah. Who are you? Why are you talking? My name is Richard Hill, and I'm counsel for the property owner. Thank you.
So thank you. That's the end of the quasi-judicial portion. So let me give you a brief introduction to how...
Lucy?
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
If I could briefly interject.
Yeah.
With respect to the disclosure made by Commissioner Walsh, I think it would be appropriate to remind the audience that any member who wishes to speak tonight is able to rebut the substance of the disclosure that Ms. Walsh made during the course of your public comments, and that would be the opportunity for you to do so.
Okay,
Thank you.
perfect. Thank you. So the structure of this evening, we only had... the Planning Policy Commission, as a 7-member body, quorum is 4 members. Hello, quorum. And so Commissioner McCauley is only able to be here until 7:45. That is the extent of time that we can meet. This is a public hearing. I will make a brief presentation. We will watch a 15-minute video clip. Then we will take public testimony. And we will hope to accomplish as much as we can in the time that we have this evening. So what we are bringing to you is related to Talus Parcel 9 and ending of the development agreements. The process began early last year in the spring. This is just a record of all the various meetings, public meetings that we have had, either with the community, with various commissions, or council committees. In March, the council remanded to PPC the designation of Parcel 9 within the context of the replacement regulations, and the question is whether it should be UVMF for multifamily or UVSF for single family. You may remember, because we worked with you last summer, that there were 3 goals. They've evolved a little bit since you've seen them, but they're essentially the same. That we had 3 goals through this process. 1 was retaining the character of each urban village. 2 was to create as few non-conforming situations as we could. And lastly was to replace 15 to 20-year-old regulations, use the city regulations to the greatest extent we could without affecting the character. To do that, we sat down with each of the parcels in Talus. We examined the uses that were in place, and based on those uses, if the property was developed or if it only had entitlement and had not been developed, then we proposed zoning to either match what had been built or to implement what the entitlement that they possessed. This chart was developed for the community meeting at Talus in January. The left-hand side is what was in the original Talus development agreement. The right-hand side is the proposed Talus replacement regulations. You'll notice that some of these, in this column and this column, there are many arrows that are blue pointing down. That means that over the course of the properties being developed, either the density or the height was reduced. So that was not part of developing the replacement regulations. It was part of developing each parcel along the way. And there was one parcel, the orange was the one parcel where it was increased during their land use permitting phase. All the white cells mean there was no change.
So to clarify, those were decisions made by the relevant developer? within the development agreement, or are those decisions made by the city, or both?
So generally, you could reduce your category through an election process. So it might have been the master developer, or it might have been the individual parcel developer. The city had to confirm that it was consistent with the criteria, but there was no significant action needed to take that. It was built into the development agreement. So just to cover the history a little bit more of Parcel 9, on the left, you can see this is the image that was in the development agreement, and Talus Parcel 9 was assigned high density, and those development regulations are shown here. But that didn't actually subdivide the land. So the first action that took place immediately the year after the development agreement was adopted was a master plat of all of Talus. It did not change any development regulations, but it established the sort of first set of boundaries for each parcel. Subsequently, in the years 2004 to 2013, there were 3 lot line adjustments to the parcel. Again, did not change any of the development standards. It was still designated as high-density residential. But for purposes of infrastructure, reservoir, and development parcel size, lot line adjustments were performed. Then in 2014, a preliminary plat of parcels 7 and 8 was submitted. The density categories such as high density or medium density actually have both a minimum and a maximum density. And so any proposal, land use proposal, must fall within that range. Both parcels 8 and 9 fell below the range, so each of them was reduced by a density category. So that was the time at which Parcel 9 was reduced to medium density. So now we're at the point where we're considering, with the replacement regulations, the zoning. Up until this time, all the parcels in Talus were zoned urban village, and it was basically that sent you to the development agreement, which had all the details. When we were considering the replacement regulations, we had to say, okay, how do we take what's in the development agreement and change that into zoning? So our decision tree is essentially, what is the land use? It's residential. What are our zoning options? For solely residential property, it can either be UV multifamily or UV single family. And a lot of that fell to, do we have one unit on the property, or do we have multiple units on the property? That was the primary question. And so that's where kind of the crux of the situation, because Parcel 9 is in this purgatory between having an approved preliminary plat and not being final platted. With 90 dwelling units on a single parcel, staff identified UV multifamily. However, if the final plat had gone through and it had been parcelized, if that's a word, thank you for accepting it, then it would have been zoned UV single family. So we're kind of in this betwixt and between, and that is the question that we're coming back to you with. I think the last piece that we want to...
Sorry, Lucy, to clarify
Sure.
on that. So whether or not it's MF or SF, so it still has the same 90 entitlement.
Yes.
Is the proposed plat 90 property units either way?
Yes. So the plat had 90 lots for the 90 units.
Okay, so the total number of lots inside Parcel 9 will not change with this discussion?
So right now, it is proposed to have a zoning cap of 90. The plat had 90 lots. I don't know what else, we don't know exactly what's going to happen going forward subsequent to the landslide in 2015 and the stabilization work that's going on now.
So it's my understanding we're not getting into lot lines and anything around that. In either, let's see, in either case, could it be built up versus individual units. I don't know how to put the
Okay,
difference between those.
Let me give it a shot and see if I actually am answering your question.
Yeah,
So, under UV multifamily, you can build either stacked flats or attached units or detached units. So it's a broader range of uses, as you can see listed here. Single family has only detached and attached units on individual lots. And these uses are consistent with the property if it was final platted. If it was not final platted and they had 90 units, then they would.
so, but even with the UVMF, if they wanted to create what would have been the final latidization, to create another word for you,
Thank you.
they could.
Yes.
Because it includes single-family detached and single-family attached townhomes
Yes.
on individual lots. Okay.
But to point out some of the concerns that have been raised, I think part of it is that there is a broader range of uses than the plat would have resulted in. The current, they were allowed to have up to 60 feet under medium density. A multifamily would be consistent in having the 60 feet, although it has some different restrictions under the replacement regulations, whereas the single family has the height of 45 feet. So I think that you'll hear this in the video in a moment. I think there's some concern about expectations versus possibilities. And then lastly, the chart at the bottom is just my crazy chart. I'll explain that in a minute. But so here's parcel 9 in the zoning map. Here's parcel 9 in the land use map. The zoning map, pink is single family. Someone else picked these colors. I have no idea why. And lilac is multifamily. And so you can see the variety of zoning that's in this area.
No, you can't, because they all look the same.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, let me point to this. So 6A is lilac. This is the proposed zoning. Parcel 9 is lilac. Parcel 14 is lilac. And then this little parcel 8A right here, it's a little quarter acre. Those are the 4 parcels that are proposed for multifamily. Thank you.
Have any of those been platted?
So so as multifamily, they wouldn't be platted. Some of them are built.
Okay, that's what I meant to say.
Okay,
Some of
so
those are built.
6A is built.
Okay.
And 14 is built. Obviously, parcel 9 is not built, and 8A is not built.
Okay. What's on parcels 6 and 14?
6 is a stacked flat apartment building project, multiple buildings, as is, parcel 14 is kind of a garden apartment style.
Okay.
So it's a lot of different buildings. And then the land use map, you can see the letters standing for low, medium, and high, for instance. And this map has been carried forward only because the urban design guidelines for Talus are based on those categories. So it's not a regulatory map anymore, but it just is another way of looking at the area and sort of, because it does represent densities. So you can see that, can you? No. Okay, the check mark, luckily they're check marks. So in zoning, there are, many parcels that are single family and 3 that are multifamily. The single family are both single family detached and single family attached. Multifamily housing type and multifamily zoning obviously match up. I think the only thing, and I'm not sure this chart means anything, I just did it, so I thought I should
Oh, this is
give
helpful.
it to you. You can see that the low, medium, and high don't necessarily match any particular housing type or zoning. There's a little more diversity. So I don't know that there's any conclusion to draw other than that happened. So that's the end of my presentation. I think our next step would be to show you the video clip from the council, and then we would open it up for public testimony.
Additional information that I wanted to read into the record. During last week, Councilmember Ray had submitted various questions and had discussions with our city staff and legal staff, and I wanted to provide some.
Buffering.
You never see this happen, huh?
When did Chris contact you?
Weeks ago. Yeah, before all this stuff happened.
No, this was March.
Well, yeah, before it came.
Apologies.
Did you watch this already? Concern is that it was supposedly based on a constituent. The constituent is married to one of the councilmen. Was in all of our meetings, we already discussed this. He has, in his opinion, he would like this. He didn't come at it from an unbiased perspective. He had a conversation. There's some issues with how the recommendation of it downs on account of ours.
Lucy Sloman is trying to show a video. Do you have any advice? Is that just,
Right, but
it's buffering, right?
unit and the height is what formed.
So what went to council was,
Okay,
We recommended,
just
and
buffering, right?
it was originally high density. Then it got downgraded to
now Ray's trying to get down there.
single family. Tried to push it through, and council said, we're hearing about it.
Okay,
It's a
thanks.
public hearing.
Okay, thanks. Thank you.
You have to find that point again.
She knows
It's
the
like
minute
3
mark.
hours in, yeah.
3 hours and 4 minutes.
There you go. No, you had it. That's it. That's good enough.
I have some additional information that I wanted to read into the record. During last week, Councilmember Ray had submitted various questions and had discussions with our city staff and legal staff, and I wanted to provide some of that information on the record today for other council members who may not have been aware of it, and for the public. The Council Land and Shore Committee met on March 1st, 2018 to discuss the ending of the Talus DA and the adoption of replacement regulations. During their discussion, the 3 committee members discussed the various options for replacement zoning on unbuilt parcels in Talus. The committee recommended that the bill be moved to the March 19th council meeting for action, and that additional discussion could occur as to the options for zoning for unbuilt parcels. Since the committee meeting, additional questions have been asked by council members of our city attorney and DSD staff. The information below answers the questions and is being provided to council for consideration during deliberations. The information describes the zoning designations for council and provides additional background information on Parcel 9, which was the subject of the committee questions. There are several options that can be considered for the unbuilt parcels. Multifamily zoning. This zoning would allow the dwelling unit entitlements assigned to a parcel to be used for multifamily or single-family development. For Parcel 9, this multifamily zoning would permit both townhouses or apartment buildings. Regardless of the building form, the maximum height would be 60 feet. Single-family zoning. This zoning would allow the entitlements assigned to a parcel to be used for single-family development. For Parcel 9, this zoning is a lower density category than originally assigned to the property under the DA. This zoning would reduce the building height allowance to 45 feet, single-family. This zoning would permit a townhouse building form and would be buildable under the existing approved preliminary plat for Parcel 9. Parcel 9 was originally designated as high density on a 3.57 acre parcel. This would have permitted the development of the entitled 90 dwelling units to be in a building or buildings up to 85 feet tall. Subsequently, the parcel was redesignated as medium density, and the parcel's footprint was expanded to over 5 acres under the current development agreement. This allowed for the 90-unit entitlement to be built in a building or buildings up to 60 feet in height. If the developer of Parcel 9, which has an approved preliminary plat for 90 single-family attached lots that are townhomes, does not wish to or cannot construct what is shown on the preliminary plat, then the developer would need to propose the subsequent development that meets the requirements of the replacement regulation City Council adopts. If the council chooses to proceed with the staff recommendation from the AB, the process tonight would be to move, second, deliberate, and vote on the motion in the AB. If the council chooses to consider assigning single-family medium-density zoning instead of multifamily medium zoning to any parcels, the process would be to move and second the motion to discuss the proposal to reconsider the recommended zoning designations and to request a public hearing at a council meeting at a date certain to allow for discussion of this change to the administration's recommendation. The vote on the motion may be considered after the public hearing. There would be no vote on the main motion at the council meeting tonight. The council may wish to consider the following when reviewing their options. The December 4th City Council meeting, council reviewed the goals for ending of the DAs in both Highlands and Talus. They were to retain the character of each urban village, create as few non-conforming situations as possible, and replace and update the 15 to 20-year-old standards. Use current and city regulations to the greatest extent possible, except where it will significantly impact character. So that was delivered to council on the weekend via email, and I just wanted to make sure that the public was also aware of this information. Any questions for Lucy? Councilmember Winterstein.
Thank you. Earlier, Lucy, when you had this slide up when you were presenting, you said that these proposed regulations for Parcel 9 were difficult. I think you used that word, but I look up there and I remember the same thing when we were in committee at Land and Shore, and the currently kind of what's allowed there per the revised preliminary plat looks exactly like proposed replacement regulations. So that seems pretty straightforward to me. Am I missing anything?
So I think the two sides to this coin are that in terms of the where the parcel is right now and the regulations that were in place with the preliminary plat and the proposed regulations, they match. What I think the concern is that if the preliminary plat had gone to final plat, we would, and those, it had been platted into those 90 lots, we would have applied single-family zoning to that completed parcel. And so I think that is the concern is, do we zone it based on where it is right now and carry forward with more flexibility, or do we carry forward what would have been if it hadn't slid and if it moves to final plat?
Okay, thank you.
Member Ray.
I still have a lot of questions, and so if you all would indulge me for a couple minutes, I mean, I have a lot of questions. And part of the reason I want to go through these questions is there's a lot of uncertainty about the evolution of Parcel 9. There's a lot of information that has been presented in ways that have been difficult to understand for both the council and for the public. And I want to make sure that we have all the pertinent information daylighted before we make this decision that really could have significant impact, and we heard it today from the public, significant impact on the community. So I'm going to take us back to ground zero. So work with me here. How's Parcel 9 currently zoned?
Urban village,
So what's that mean?
right of development agreement.
How was, and you talked about this one, so I've got my notes here.
That's okay. I'll walk with you again.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that a lot, Lucy. How was Parcel 9 originally designated in terms of density in the DA?
So it was high density. It's this left-hand column, and I'm just pointing to it to help guide us through it. High-density residential, which did not allow single-family detached, only attached and multifamily, 85 feet in height, 23 to 150 dwelling units per acre.
Awesome. And the changes that were made to the development agreement that changed it into medium density and expanded the size of the parcel, that was done?
So the change in the size of the parcel was, I believe, a lot line adjustment that was made prior to the preliminary plat. I'm so impressed that you think I remember everything.
Of course you do.
So the parcel 7, 8, and 9, you can see how, for instance, the road alignment changed between the original adopted development agreement and the platting for parcel 9. And so in adjusting to create the 3 parcels that would be platted, there was a lot line adjustment. Then when they were ready to do the preliminary plat and we were going through the sort of preliminary discussions, we recognized that based on the number of units that they had purchased and the size of the property, they could not meet the minimum density, which is the 23 dwelling units per acre for high density. So there's an election process within the development agreement, which allows them to shift down one density category without anything other than just saying we want to do that, which is what they did, which took them to medium density residential, which added detached residential as a use, reduced the height and reduced the density, and they had purchased as their entitlement 90 dwelling units.
And those changes were approved by the master developer and the city, so that became the new law of the land in the DA. So when the preliminary plat for 9 was filed, how was the land identified in the preliminary plat? Was it single-family, multifamily?
That is a kind of zoning approach that isn't used within the development agreement. So it just was classified as medium density residential, which had this range of residential uses that were allowed. And as long as it fell within that range of uses, the ones I've shown here in the middle, and was within the density, fell between the density minimum and maximum, it was allowed. So we did not classify it as one thing or the other.
And the plat for 9 showed individual property lines, which
Yes.
would be consistent with single-family, not multifamily?
Single family attached.
Right. So I was just looking at a couple of neighboring neighborhoods, so Ascent and Centera, which both have attached townhomes that show individual property line and are being designated or zoned. Proposed zoning on them is single family.
Right, and I think you're touching on the point of being in this kind of purgatory between preliminary and final plat was how we ended up in between.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get to intent, because where I sit is we're trying to balance 2 things: neighborhood expectations, we heard those earlier today, and property owner intent. And so I'm trying to establish what really is the intent. So let me go ask you some questions that I bet you won't know the answer to. If I go to the King County Assessor's parcel viewer, how would this parcel be identified as its current use? Single family. If I was to go down and read the thing that said, what's the highest and best use if vacant on this property?
Councilmember Ray, just read her the answers. I don't think you have to
All
make
right.
her say no each time.
Thank you. They only had the 2. So its highest and best use right now is single family. So I'm moving on. So when you presented to the Talus community on January 23rd, you indicated that this was going to be, your table showed adopted density on parcel 9 was high with an 80-foot cap, and that we were down zoning to get to medium density. So I was just curious why you didn't disclose that we'd already done that down zone.
Actually, that was a discussion item, I believe, at that meeting, and what I identified wasn't that we were down zoning it, that over the course of property in thinking back, there was one parcel that was upzoned through the process, and so we talked about how the table represented what had happened as the parcels were being developed, and those changes mostly of down, dropping to the next lower level, and the one example of it going to a higher level had all happened during its development. It was not part of the replacement regulation process.
Okay. So recognizing that the parcel 9 will be vested under our vesting rules, our most restrictive vesting rules, and it could be built as currently platted as single-family attached homes. Would it also be possible on that property with a multifamily designation, 60-foot, to put in a 5 to 6-story apartment buildings on that parcel?
I thought about that. While some of that is true, but the hillside designation or the hillside regulations that have been added in the urban villages would be more restrictive than typical multifamily parcels because of the limitations on regrading and walls and stepping through the site. So there would be the ability to put in stacked flat apartments. The form of the building might be different than a traditional apartment building.
We could put in fairly large apartment buildings. I mean, I guess that's not a good question. Apartment buildings would definitely be a form factor we could put into that parcel.
Yes.
And they could be, you told me about this, so on the, because it's on a slope, it would be, the bottom could be 60 feet tall?
So no, but I think that the diagram that is here, sorry, I'm using a PDF because I thought it would work better. So from the road, the maximum building height would be fixed. It would not be able to average the grades. So the topmost level would be the 60 feet, but the building would be required to step its roof line following the grade, which would therefore restrict it from being 60 feet at the street.
40 feet at the street?
Unless I evaluated.
Yeah, okay, but tall and also because it's multifamily, no setback, so it could be right at the street?
Right, so could single family.
No, single family has a 5-foot setback.
Okay.
So when you were talking to the community, did you share the fact that we could be building apartment buildings on this parcel with them?
Councilmember Ray, the question was whether or not building forms were discussed, because I'm not sure.
No, I think it's more than form because it's also use. I think there's a difference between single-family individual ownership and multifamily rental. And it has a significance not only in the form of the building, but in the quality of the neighborhood. So I think it's significant, and I think it's something that would have been very important for the public to understand at that time to provide some feedback. And what I've heard from the community is, wow, we felt like we were getting kind of partial information, and we didn't really understand all of this because it's very technical and very jargony. And they were feeling very much like they, I use the word bums rush, but they weren't getting complete information so that they could react to it. So I'm going to kind of stop there and kind of summarize. And the reason that I brought this up is if we designate this property as single family, we can build exactly what is entitled or what is currently envisioned on that plat as designated by the current plat on 9. So the developer can build exactly what is currently envisioned on that plat with a single family designation. If we designate it as multifamily, then the community is at risk of that parcel being turned into apartment buildings, which is something that I've heard pretty loud and clear from the community is not something that they think is appropriate. My incredibly succinct fear is if we don't zone this thing as multifamily, we're back here 3 years from now, we're having a quasi-judicial proceeding, and we're going to have to go ahead with something we know is wrong.
So Councilmember Ray, I don't think we've made a motion yet.
Okay.
So what
I'm
I'm
done with my
going to
questions.
do.
Thank you.
And you can deliberate more after the motion is made. Are there any other council members who have questions? Oh, Councilmember Ramos, then Councilmember Hunt.
I just have one question on height, because I know it went from 85 to 60, but then I heard that it's 45, but I haven't seen 45 anywhere, so I'm trying to figure where the 45 came from.
So I believe the 45 came up because single-family zoning would limit the development to 45 feet.
So the current plan is 45-foot limit.
No. The current proposal is 60 feet, which is multifamily zoning, and that was the concern that was raised. Now, the other possibility, I don't remember exactly when 45 feet was mentioned. It may be partly because the townhouses would likely have been built at 45
I
feet.
believe, Councilmember Ramos, that was part of the information I gave in answer to Councilmember Ray's questions this weekend. It was about single-family versus multifamily. That is when the 45-foot. It's not on the slide because it's new information from this weekend. Councilmember Hunt.
Okay. Let's see. So I believe we're going to open it up for public testimony. Is there anyone who would like to sign up who hasn't? Okay, I'm going to take the clipboard out.
After watching that video, we'll open it up for public comment at 7:18. There's only 2 people signed up so far.
And since
Rookie Shoal?
and then let's, since we've got a hard stop at 7:45, let's stick with the 5-minute limit.
Yeah, 5-minute limit.
No problem. Hi, I'm Brookie Scholl, the president of the Talus Residential Association. I'm at 522 Timber Creek Drive, Northwest in Issaquah. Hello, committee members. In 2014, Resmark received approval to build 90 townhomes on Parcel 9. And if the landslide would not have happened in 2015, today we would be looking at 90 mountainside townhomes, no higher than 45 feet when we drive up to the top of Talus Drive. But we did have a slide. And so regardless of zoning, because that's a lot of stuff that's very technical, really what we want to get at is all we want is what we thought we were going to get back in 2014. This whole issue really is coming down to fear of the unknown. So I guess I'd like to lay out our fears and hope that through this process you can help us alleviate those. So first, we're worried that 90 mountainside townhomes will turn into one giant 60-foot tall monstrosity at the top of Talus Hill. Frankly, we're also worried that 90 will become a bigger number. And then we're also worried that due to the financial impacts of the slide, that the goals of the builder will be to build whatever's easiest, whatever's cheapest, and fastest to get out, and that we will be the only ones left with that outcome. So to ease our fears and focus less on zoning speak, I'm asking that the PCC, as part of this process, just ask the owner or lawyer of Parcel 9 to disclose what they do intend to build when the hill is stabilized. And we would all benefit from knowing their intentions. Thanks.
Mr. Hill.
This is also in the printout. Commissioners, good evening. My name is Rich Hill, and I'm counsel for the owner of Parcel 9. Very much appreciate the opportunity to address you this evening and your consideration of the issue that's been remanded to you by the council. The owner of Parcel 9, to respond to Brookie's question, fully intends to develop the approved project pursuant to the preliminary plat upon completion of the retaining structure walls that, as you know, are currently under construction at Talus. That's their goal, that's their objective. With that said, the proposed downzone is of grave concern to the owner because, one, we don't know what the world will look like at the time that the walls are complete. We don't know what the world will look like. Creating a downzone at this point in time does a number of things that affects property value. It reduces allowable height. It means that the existing proposal will be a non-conforming one. It increases setbacks, and it deprives the opportunity to do multifamily use on the property. Now, tonight, the owner respectfully asks the commission to postpone the hearing, and Mr. Lell addressed the council on that point earlier tonight in light of the Schnitzer decision, and I've made copies of the Schnitzer decision. I know you probably love to read court decisions, so I don't expect you to read it tonight, but if you have trouble sleeping tonight, you might want to walk through it. But the Schnitzer decision just came out today, as Mr. Lell mentioned. That decision makes it clear that the city's consideration of this downzone is what's called a site-specific rezone process. And as commissioners, I'm sure you're familiar with that process. In the city of Issaquah, it's a type 6 process. The reason Schnitzer would say that what you're being asked to consider as a site-specific rezone is the test in that case is it a specific tract of land? Here it is, it's Parcel 9. Is there a request for reclassification? Yes, it's a request for reclassification different from what the development agreement had applicable to it. And 3, is there a specific party? And in this case, it would be the city council that asks you to consider it. The consequence of it being site-specific is that, as I mentioned, it becomes a type 6 process in the city. The procedure that we're following here today is not consistent with that type 6 process. Secondly, it is quasi-judicial, and Mr. Lell, I think very appropriately tonight, reserved rights, but said, let's deal with the quasi-judicial process and deal with that. The burden is on the proponent of the rezone. The proponent has to demonstrate what's called changed circumstances, and I'm sure you've dealt with that in your experience on the commission, to justify the downzone. And then finally, the appearance of fairness doctrine is applicable. With respect to the commissioners, as I mentioned earlier tonight, I have no objection to your participation. Here, as I mentioned, the city is not following the type 6 process. For this to meet the criteria of your own ordinance, that process would need to be followed. In addition, the staff has not had an opportunity, and I don't blame your very effective staff because this decision just came down today, but the staff has not had an opportunity to evaluate the burden of proof issues, the changed circumstances issues, or the other rezone criteria that are set forth in your ordinance. In the event, the city attorney nonetheless advises you to proceed at this point with the hearing, with reservation of its rights. The property owner would respectfully ask that you stay the course you set last September when you recommended the MF designation of the property. And maintain this designation. There's no evidence in the record, members of the commission, that supports downzoning the property at this point in time. There's no factual basis for the commission to say there are changed circumstances since we looked at this in September. I've set forth the property owner's views in some detail, perhaps too much detail for the commissioners, but in some detail in my letter, and I know you've probably had an opportunity to review it. We very much appreciate the commission's consideration of what we set forth in the letter. In conclusion, want to meet my 5 minutes. In conclusion, the hearing from the property owner's perspective should be postponed because this should be pursuant to a type 6 process. Staff has not had the opportunity to provide the planning commission with analysis of the applicable rezone criteria. If the commission does decide tonight to proceed with consideration of the council's remand request, again with reservations of rights. 5 minutes is up. May I have 45 seconds to finish the sentence? It's up to you.
Sure, go ahead.
I got
Okay.
your attention.
Okay.
Quickly.
The property owner asked respectfully that you stay the course you set last September 28th, only 8 months ago, and maintain multifamily zoning on the property. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anybody else in the public want to make a comment? All the people came. Nobody else wants to talk. In that case, we will close the public hearing
Did you want to speak?
at 7:27. Oh,
No,
did you just come in?
you closed it.
I didn't know you were that close to the end,
Oh, no.
so
No, that's fine. I didn't know that you were there. Again, 5 minutes, please.
I don't think I'm going to take that long. Okay, my name's Connie Marsh, and I live up on Squawk Mountain. And I think my takeaway from this is the last decision with the Talus and Issaquah Highlands end of days. And this is the one that has caused the most concern. And while the guidance all along was to keep it as close as possible to the development agreement, when you have the one outstanding thing that is causing a lot of community anxiety and concern about changing the expectations of an area, you can zone it however you want to. It's unzoned, and you can do what you want and break that. Well, we have to do what the original DA said. There's nothing saying that you have to stay with that. Community expectations is that it's going to look like the pre-plat, like what they were told was going to happen. So, given you have the artistic license, in this case, I would go with the community expectation. That's it.
Thank you, Connie. Anybody else? I don't want to cut anybody off. Seeing no other volunteers, we'll close the public comments now at 7:29.
So I have one clarifying question. In the public comment that the HOA president made, one of the concerns was that this would increase the number of units. That is incorrect, just to clarify, because in either case, it's going to be capped at 90. So the decision here is all about form, setbacks, and heights. The total entitlement will not change.
This process would not change the entitlement. I think the HOA president was just speaking to general fears that that somehow through this process would not increase it, as far as I know. And it would be true that any property owner could come back to the council at any time and ask for an increase, and that would be a public process.
Yeah, no, and it was a good question. I just wanted to clarify. So
Sure.
no matter what we do, we will neither increase nor decrease the number of housing units that's entitled.
There's been no proposal to change that.
Okay.
Since we last looked at this when we did our joint sessions and we went through the end of the development agreements, has staff found something that would cause them to change their recommendation to us?
We have not proposed a change in recommendation, but I think it's the being trapped in purgatory between preliminary plat and final plat, community expectations and concerns about changes in the future that cause the council to remand this back for further discussion here.
So is council requesting the downzone from medium to single-family density, or they just want us to talk about it more?
They thought that single-family should be considered for this property. I don't know that they had a recommendation. I think that they were remanding back I don't have the exact language in front of me.
It was a split vote.
It was a split, yeah. So
Okay, yeah, 'cause
my
I didn't watch
interpretation,
the rest of the
when
video.
I watched the clipped it, and then I dug in and I kind of watched the whole meeting to give myself kind of the brevity around the clip. And from what I recall, is it was a split decision, and so council didn't actually have a
I think
recommendation.
the split decision was around process, about whether it would come to PPC or whether the hearing would, and all action would be held at the council. They were not taking a vote at that time on one use or the other, because a hearing had to take place before they could do that.
Yes.
Is there any new information from when the last time when we recommended medium density? Is there any new information?
Well, I think I'm not sure that, it depends on how you view new information. The process, we went through the process, we made a recommendation, we provided all the sort of history and detail that we included in the memo, which was sort of back of house before, and we're trying to be very transparent about all those steps and how the property has evolved.
Okay, so presumably this is all public information. We've just focused, daylighted, and kind of repeated and consolidated everything zeroing in on parcel 9.
Right.
But none of this is new.
Not things.
It was just buried among tens of thousands of other pieces of paper.
Well, right. I don't think that we thought about these things, but we didn't necessarily present all of this. And I think that the crux of the matter is that the preliminary plat has been approved, the final plat has not been approved. If the final plat had been approved, it would have automatically, like all the parcels that were identified, have been zoned UV single family. But that sort of overt conversation did not happen either at PPC or at the Talus community meeting.
And the property owner, since it's just a preliminary plat, has full legal right to come back with a completely different plat as long as it fits the zoning, correct?
Right. The property, just because you have a preliminary plat does not mean that you have to follow through on that, and I think that is part of the community concern.
And part of what I remember from our discussions, because there was another parcel that was actually much more hotly debated within Talus at the time, and one of the reasons that we didn't focus the nitty-gritty on this, and why maybe Mr. Hill wasn't a part of our discussions at that time, was because we understood that the plat was still undergoing structural issues and was not actually at a point that we needed to be looking at what was to be happening on it, that we weren't at that level yet. So there was a reason that we weren't going over this. We were just going off of what we already knew from the preliminary plat as the plan. Correct? Is that a correct understanding at the time?
I think staff made certain assumptions based on its state at the time, and that the council felt that a very overt conversation was necessary to ensure that the possibilities and expectations had been fully aired.
At that time, there was an encouragement from the Joint Commissions for Talus to really work with developers to communicate their intent with them. And the developer at the time had one direction they wanted to go. I'm forgetting which parcel it was.
17B, right?
Yeah. On the corner, thank you. And so I would kind of go back to that, and I would encourage Mr. Hill to go back to his client and to really encourage them to work with the Talus community. As having open lines of communication, it sounds like a big issue here, is really the community cares a lot about the parcel, and that's a great opportunity for the applicant to be able to reach out and really take that feedback and really be a part and a member of the community rather than having a lot of mystery. And I think that would help the situation a little bit. So that's a kind of an aside that I would bring for the applicant. But
So Lucy, I would say my only frustration with this process is looking back to that September timeframe, that PPC's discussion was very focused on that 17B. And I think we had a little bit of blinders on, probably based on the information that we were getting or not getting from staff, about Parcel 9, and that if we had had the opportunity at that point to go through this process, I think that would have daylighted information much earlier on so that we weren't having to go back and look at one parcel in specific, which can become a legal problem.
Well,
I know, hindsight is 20/20.
I'm not going to speak to the legal problems. We have enough lawyers in here that can discuss that. I think, point taken. I think one of the challenges that we face with the complexity of all of this and being the first time through the process is that staff made their best effort, and at the same time, that was part of why we brought, all those meetings that you see, I think that was, we were asked a lot of really interesting and varied questions that sent us back to scratch our heads and think through things. And unfortunately, Parcel 9 just didn't come up at that time. I don't think that there was, at the time, it didn't seem like such a big deal. We were wrong.
Yeah. At the time, I remember we discussed a lot was the issue of the slide and wanting to make sure that whatever was built on 9, however it came out, was going to go through SEPA review, and it was going to fit criteria of not being a huge safety concern for the community. So that was what I remember us really focusing on for this particular parcel, because we didn't actually have an applicant in front of us saying, this is not what we want to have happen. And we also didn't have the community in front of us saying, this is not what we want to have happen within those discussions. So I think that was a big thing that we talked about, was making sure that staff recognized that we had all these things that we have put in place as to when this parcel was going to be built out, that it was going to adhere to everything that we needed as a community to feel that it was soundly built.
Yep.
That was my recollection when I went back through my notes for this. So, again, and AJ, I asked it, and AJ asked it. There's nothing on this since we've looked at it, other than the issues that the community is feeling that it's not appropriate to what they're wanting to envision for the parcel. Is that correct, as far as city staff is concerned?
I think that the point that city staff, I think, are continue to return to is that we're caught kind of between what would have happened with a final plat and where we are right now. And I think, if anything, explaining the zoning in light of that would have been a great thing to have done last year. And I just don't think we thought about it that way. And that's why we're back here. I think these are extremely important conversations to have in an overt way.
Can you go, maybe I don't remember, I might not have been here for that meeting, but I'm very confused between this plat being, as you say, purgatory. So it sounds like your preliminary was one thing. And if we had proceeded along,
No, it's not as much purgatory.
final, you would have got something different totally than what was in the preliminary. Is that correct?
No, and thank you for clarifying. So so we don't anticipate, if they go to final plat, we were assuming that it would be consistent with the preliminary plat. I think the challenge is that at a sort of very gross level, multifamily is more than one unit on a piece of property. Single family is either detached or attached, one unit per one piece of property. Because this has 90 units on one piece of property, we thought multifamily. But the truth of the matter is, if the slide hadn't happened, it would have gone to final plat, and therefore it would have already been platted by the time we started the process mapping in 2017, and therefore we would have proposed UV single family. And I think that's where the community's concern and expectations come from, is that they want the zoning to match that platting.
So let's talk about community concerns. So I think the comments that the HOA director made were about about the form and the bulk of the building, which are reasonable and legitimate. But I want to anchor in on the comments that Councilmember Ray made, which I think are pertinent since he's the one that started this and highlighted this. And he said what typically goes unsaid in these conversations about multifamily versus single family. And I appreciate that Mr. Ray had the balls to actually say what normally gets unsaid, which is he doesn't want renters on this block of land. And if you look at his quote, his problem isn't multifamily versus single family. His problem is with ownership and with renters. And so the one thing that, and I don't want to presuppose that any of the good people in this audience think that, because none of you have said this, but the one thing that concerns me about this is with Councilmember Ray bringing this up, is he basically, if you go through the whole song and dance that he did, he basically then concludes with, I want to make sure I don't have renters living near me.
Well, I would say that that was a point that Councilmember Ray made, and that ownership versus rental is not something that the city has a role in, except with affordable housing, potentially. I think there was also a form concern about the sort of scale and mass of the building, that the townhouses, although the height limit was 60 feet, that townhouses are probably not going to be 60 feet, while an apartment building could be 60 feet tall. And so I think there was both an ownership and a form concern that he was daylighting.
Pending going through the new directive we have handed down to us from the Supreme Court, what can you tell me about what would change about this process? Mr. Hill mentioned going through number 6. What was that?
Level 6. He said type 6. It's level 6.
Level 6 review.
So
How does what?
So
how-
I will
how does
say that at
change
4:30 this afternoon, I got to do something about this. So I will just say that I'm not quite sure what Mr. Hill is referring to, because the rezone process is PPC and council, and the process we're going through is similar to a rezone, which is PPC and council. So there may be some nuances to that process that he is concerned have not taken place. But in general, the typical steps are the same.
Well, that raises a question to the city attorney, I guess, is what does this decision in the Supreme Court do, and should we hold this in abeyance until you and the staff have had a chance to fully review it and decide what is appropriate in regards to what level it should be done?
Well, to answer your question, Mr. Chairman, as I indicated previously, the decision of the Supreme Court is under review by my office, and we're in consultation about staff regarding that. We should have that done within the next few days, and we'll be able to provide a more definitive recommendation. If it's the council's preference to postpone action and withhold your substantive recommendation until that's complete, that's certainly within your prerogative.
I think that's the prudent thing for us to do, is to wait until this thing has
I agree.
had a chance to be resolved by the staff and the attorney.
So that would mean continuing the public hearing to your next meeting.
All right, guys.
Next chance that we have a public meeting.
I mean, I'm fine making a decision tonight, but I don't think any of you three guys are.
I'm not.
I
I think we
tend
should
toward
wait.
multifamily, which would not end up with a legal concern, so.
I am as well. I have at this point, I'm tending towards of not doing a rezone to the SF and sticking with the MF. However, in light of this new information, I do think it's prudent to continue on and give the public another opportunity to review this information.
But I think I might disagree with you. I think if our thought was we wanted to go with a down zone, then I think we would clearly need to postpone and make sure that we did that through the proper steps. But I think if the commission's position is to stick with the multifamily, then I don't think this is relevant, because then nothing changes. Mr. Attorney, do you agree?
Actually, Mr. Commissioner, if the Commission's preference is to postpone the recommendation until a legal recommendation from my office and staff has been received by you. I don't think it matters which direction you would actually be making or forwarding your recommendation on. The legal concerns that have been raised by Mr. Hill would apply across the board.
Regardless of which decision we make.
If what's being presented to you is in fact a site-specific rezone proposal, irrespective of how it ultimately is concluded, that process under the landowner's theory would be the same irrespective of which direction you ultimately recommend.
Yeah, because I'm just tempted to make a decision and
Yeah.
move on.
I don't like holding things up when we have the opportunity to move them forward. I understand the legal concern and the idea that if we are considering a single property rezone outside of the process that it's supposed to go through. Yeah.
And if I could, Commissioners, the city will have an opportunity at the city council level to address any of those procedural concerns. If you would like to proceed tonight with your recommendation, there will be essentially a procedural off-ramp at that point that the council can be advised upon. Just to
That
throw out
satisfies
there for your
my concerns with the idea that if we were to move forward with this with a similar recommendation to what we had provided back in September, and then council has the opportunity to, again, secondarily review that and review the Supreme Court decision and whether or not the process was followed as it should.
That is correct, and the council, as the ultimate decision maker in this context, is really where the substantive determination will be made.
We make, basically, we're putting the ball back in their court,
Yeah.
which is what we always do because we only make recommendations.
That's right.
Yep.
So,
Can I make a motion?
they make a motion.
Okay, I would like to make a motion, and I don't have the AB in front of me, so I'm not sure what language we should be going with.
But we don't have findings of fact,
So two things. I'm not sure the form of your motion, so I had a very crude version that I provided. The second piece is because it was completely unclear what direction you might take, or if you would even take direction tonight, the second piece on the sheet of paper that's provided to you was a motion that would have a staff prepare findings of fact and conclusions to be reviewed and signed by the acting chairperson. That's very typical in the UVDC and DC to have those findings of fact reviewed and signed by the chairperson. And so I just wanted to offer that as an option because we did not bring those this evening, not knowing how many permutations there might be to consider.
So we could move to recommend that the agenda bill goes back to city council as
With the
written.
same recommendation we did in September.
Yeah, exactly. Would that make sense as a motion?
I would say maybe not in September because some changes have taken place since then,
Okay.
but potentially
written.
retaining the
Designation.
proposed
Multifamily
zoning
Okay.
of UVMF for parcel 9.
Okay, so I move that PPC recommend Agenda Bill 7524 to City Council with the multifamily designation for parcel 9.
I second.
Moved and seconded. Any more discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Unanimous.
Can you do the second motion? That's at the bottom of the sheet.
Okay.
Second motion.
I move that PPC direct Development Services Department to prepare findings of fact and conclusions for review and approval by this evening's acting PPC chairperson, affirming the PPC's recommendation to, once again, approve the Agenda Bill 7524 to council with the multifamily designation for parcel 9.
Thank you.
Second? Is there a second?
I second.
All in favor? Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
I'm not sure how many people in the audience are planning to stay for
Well,
the next public hearing, but I hope a lot.
I believe we are losing our quorum.
Yeah, so I'm,
Can't
yeah, so
even
I'm,
have a public hearing because we don't have enough, we won't have a
yeah, I gotta
quorum.
bounce.
Yep. So,
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you for coming.
Yeah.
And I'll
Fantastic.
let my wife in.
I wasn't expecting that.
I think we just have to close the meeting.
yeah.
Tell her that we're
Trish, do we just need to close the meeting at this point?
No, we think we're going to do, we're asking Kurt,
The council.
Kurt,
The tip
Crystal clear.
Kristen,
should with just 3
Kurt,
Sort of a procedural flow.
trying to get the attention. We're trying to see if Kurt wants to go first with the TIP.
We're losing our quorum.
Right, well, the TIP isn't a public hearing.
Oh, okay.
But I don't think we should do the TIP with just 3 members.
Well, it's going to council within a few weeks, so if you didn't see it now, you wouldn't get to see it, the TIP.
That's for about
The good news is it'll be on TV, so folks can watch it on TV that aren't here.
I know the
But-
first 6 digits. I don't know.
Want to do the TIP with just the 3 of us?
You guys can. Where is it? Is the TIP in?
It's the third attachment.
At the last page, is hardly any information.
Since we have an interested party who's not able to actively ask questions, can we move to have it pushed to another meeting? Would Kurt come
Well,
back?
as I was saying, the council is holding their public.
Excuse me, hold on a
Yeah.
second, please. Can the
Could you
people
guys-
that are at the earlier meeting maybe go out in the hall? We have to continue our business.
Council, thank you.
Thank everybody for coming.
Good night, thanks very much.
City Council is having their public hearing on the TIP in a few weeks, so if you all don't look at it now, you won't have a chance to look at
never look
it.
at
That's
You guys can go
the
ahead.
issues with PPC and quorums is we don't always,
Yeah.
scheduling isn't
No, I
always
can start. I'll
perfect.
see if I can squeeze in my questions in 45 seconds.
There you go.
And remember, you can send them in after the meeting as well, AJ. You can send them in after the meeting as
Yeah.
well to Kurt.
So this is really to determine 2019 and 2020?
There's not much information compared to the old TIP in regards to each project.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, you could always request that next year we do it a different way. That's fully okay.
Yeah, definitely next time we need actual project level detail, because just the description doesn't really tell
This
us
was a
anything.
huge change from how we usually get this information. I was surprised.
I'm asking Kurt. Oh, I don't know where.
No, I don't.
Because we usually have a description of each of the items as to what's involved in regards to the work.
Carl, do we need to pass this over? That's what we did. I don't know if it needs to actually be filled out or if it just
You
needs to be
can-
stated on the record or not.
You can ask him how much of the work is the work we're
You know how
doing.
to do the language
I don't know if it
for
just
that.
needs to be stated or if it actually needs to be like a
Oh,
piece of
she's
paper.
got it. She knows how to do it.
Joy, you can ask him how much of this is the work that we were supposed to be doing with our transportation levy.
Where's the
Are we doing anyways, even though we don't have a transportation levy?
Yeah.
Because I believe the answer is all of it, except for sunset.
Thanks, AJ.
Guys.
Okay, so since we are still on air. Uh-huh.
People at home are watching this exciting,
Yeah.
what the hell's going on?
What they didn't see was the 30 or so people in the audience who cleared out after the Talus DA bill was pushed through.
Well, for those at home waiting to see who won the raffle, we didn't have one. The public hearing on the Old Town Subarea Plan will have to be postponed because we don't have a quorum for public hearing? No?
Not exactly, no. Yeah, because it's, remember, you have 2
for the-
nights to do it.
Right, for the Old Town public hearing, we're just opening the public hearing tonight and introducing some things, but then we're continuing the public hearing, so we don't need the quorum because it requires the quorum to make a
No vote.
recommendation. There's no vote.
No vote.
Okay.
So are we going out of order then?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. We'll do the TIP first, I guess, and then we will open public hearing, but close it right away because we don't have a quorum. Is that correct?
Maybe open and leave.
For Old Town, you'll open it, and then you continue it to the meeting, the next meeting. That's dated
Okay.
in your packet. We'll coach you on that when it's Christmas time.
Okay. They're blinking at you because you're talking without a mic, but that's all right.
It's that kind of night.
Okay, we're ready to proceed with the TIP with what we have.
Okay. And so Kurt Seaman, Transportation Manager at the city. I'm not sure what you had in previous years, but
We used to have we used to get a list, every project would have a page that would have the funding on it and a little description of what was going on in regards versus just this blanket,
Spreadsheet.
like the overlay program, non-motor, those are all kind of standard. But the first one is the Southeast 43rd and Providence Point intersection. And I think that's the one hopefully we would gotten resolved 15 years ago, but now we're getting closer to the top of the pile.
Okay.
And it would have a description and might even show a little picture of what we're talking about. Every
So-
project had its own page.
And just to specify, as far as the top of the pile, these are in no order, right? I think I remember saying there is no hierarchy. There is.
right, well, so I think I can answer.
Well, that's true.
I think I can answer your
Used to be,
questions.
they were in order as well, so.
So
Go ahead with your presentation and we'll see if we have questions.
let me give you what I've got here. Let's start there. So for those of you that aren't familiar with the TIP, what it is and why we do it, this is a brief presentation to go through that, talk about the projects. I've highlighted some projects I'd like to go through with you. But the TIP is a 6-year plan. It's with funding shown, and then beyond that, all the projects that the city anticipates building in the long term. It's a requirement, it's a RCW requirement that cities, towns, and counties prepare. It's an advanced plan that looks into the future for not less than 6 years. And it's the code requirement, the reason behind the code is to assure that each city and town perpetually has advanced plans looking towards the future for not less than 6 years. It's also a very useful document for us because it's a requirement for us to participate and to compete for grant funding. This goes to all the other regional organizations, Sound Transit, and so forth. It will be sent to WashDOT once it's adopted by the City Council, and then it's our plan here for 2019 through 2024, and then it will be revised again next year to be 2020 to 25. So we are bringing it to you to share with you tonight. We also are going to the Council Infrastructure Committee next week to hear their comments and questions. There is a public hearing set for June 4th to get public testimony on this, and then the plan is to have it adopted at the following council meeting. That would be the 18th, I believe.
And that public hearing is at council, right?
That public hearing is the Monday, June 4th at council,
Okay,
correct.
great.
And then, assuming we have the plan adopted, then it would be filed with the state. So that's a brief overview of that. And so the TIP is informed by a lot of different plans. We have a comprehensive land use plan. We have Central Issaquah plan. We have the walk and roll plan, traffic concurrency. There's a lot of regional work going on with I-90, for example, the interchange justification report that we're working with the state on, and then as well as staff input and community input. So that's, there's some of the other players that are involved. And here's the document that, again, I'm not sure, I was out of town when this went to you, so I'm not sure all what you got. We do have we do have the packet that's the agenda bill that went to the city council, and that has each project along with a project description and funding for each one. So if you don't have access to that, we certainly can make that available to you. Sounds like perhaps you didn't get that packet, but every project has its own project description sheet, and then it also has the proposed funding for that project for all however many projects we have here. So there's what I'd like to focus on tonight are the projects. If you see the heavy double line there, so those are the projects that are in our 6-year plan and have funding proposed through the next 6 years, starting with 2018. And so those are the projects that we are really focused on here in transportation. And I would like to spend a little time, especially since you didn't get as much information as perhaps you'd like to have seen. I'd like to spend a few minutes going through each of these projects above the line, because I think they're most interesting, because they're where we're focused our time and our staff time and our money on for the next 6 years. So that's what and then there are, back here, there are happy to talk about any projects below the line, but those are in further years out beyond 2024. You can see those are the bottom half of this sheet, as well as the projects on the next sheet. So here's these are the projects that I want to talk about in a little more detail. These are the projects above the line, as I just mentioned, and these are the projects that we are planning to design and construct and move forward with in the next 6 years. And I don't expect you to read that, because I'm going to go through each one of these individually. And then in the aggregate, here's all the projects on the entire list. And so you can, if you can't see this at this scale, but if you look at your packet, you should be able to see that each project has a code number and a project and identifier on the map, so you can see what the projects are and where they are.
I really like seeing both of those two visuals. That's a really nice way to show where we're looking to spend money on transportation improvements, and seeing that it's focused in our urban core area, and then also as you continue on, that we're looking at the entire scope.
Yeah. Okay, so now I'd like to, if you want to follow, if you look at, I won't flip back and forth here, but now we're going to start here working down the list. I'm going to talk about the ones, first I'm going to talk about the ones that are location specific. So there's a couple here that I'll skip over for now, but I'll be happy to come back to. So for example, the overlay program, the non-motorized program, and the ITS camera system upgrades, which are the first 3 of the first 4 projects on your list, are pretty much citywide, and I'll talk about those in a minute, but I would, for starters, like to go through the location-specific ones. So again, I know we struggle with this no particular order idea, and trust me, there's no one in this room that wants to have a transportation master plan that helps give us more specificity and priority to our projects, and we're working on that. But this is what we have now, and so I'll just go through the projects briefly. And so this is a proposed crossing of I-90, and we don't know if it's going over the freeway, or perhaps we're thinking another option is to actually raise the grade of the freeway up, and then this crossing would be at grade with the city of Issaquah, connecting sort of 2 parts of town that are not very well connected now. We see this is out there. It's an expensive project. I forget what the dollar amount is here. This is project number 3.
TR 003.
Yep, 94 million.
And it's an expense, I mentioned it's an expensive project. So it's not a project we're going to build on our own. The cool, exciting thing about this, aside from the opportunities to connect.
71 million in 6 years.
Yeah, to connect both sides of the city. We know that Sound Transit's coming to Issaquah. We don't know exactly where that station location is going to be, but we think there's some opportunities to start thinking about a crossing, and there's potential partnerships with WashDOT and with Sound Transit and So there's a lot of great reasons to think about looking at this project. It's also tied to the IJR, if you're familiar with that. So the IJR is Interchange Justification Report. What a lot of people don't realize with that is although we're looking at Front Street as the center of that study, the requirements for IJR is that you look upstream and downstream from that. So it may be that the work that comes out of the IJR may be a recommendation to make a crossing somewhere in this location. So it's a pretty fuzzy line here. We don't know exactly what that would look like or where exactly it would go, but we think that a crossing roughly between SR 900 and the Front Street interchange makes a lot of sense for a lot of reasons. So and I'm just going to go through these all, not happy to come back and have more conversation on any of them that you'd like to. So this is another project, interesting project. This is right next to where I work over there on the other City Hall. And this is a project where the Talus was and the Holiday Inn, and it's meant to improve that interchange at 12th and 956 there, northwest of Manish Road, that whole piece there. And we have a project planned for that and pretty well described in our TIP. What's interesting about this is the state is now looking at potential alternate entrances and looking at some reconfiguration potentially to their state park. So before, our plan was to move forward this, I think start design this year, but we're going to hold off until we have entered into agreement with the state. We're going to be working with them to better understand what that all means when we talk about looking at another entrance to the state park, because if that could likely, or I shouldn't say likely, it's potentially impacts the design of this intersection. So we're going to do that work first with the state, and then we're going to come back and make an intersection improvement in this vicinity that makes sense and supports what the state wants to do with their park.
Based on that discussion that we're having, is there a time frame now that's been adjusted for addressing this?
I'm sorry, the time.
Do we have a time frame when the state's going to get back to us?
Right, so that's.
Partnership.
Right, so that's, the Parks Department's taken the lead on that, so I don't know if I know exactly the schedule. The time frame generally is about a year that effort's. We're doing some traffic study work as a part of that. So I think within the next year, we'll have a lot better clarity about that.
Okay, thank you.
So that's that one. And then I won't talk too much about this. This hopefully is going to be off our list and complete here for the holiday season. I know that our Public Works Director is working very hard weekly with the contractor to make sure that this happens and gets completed for minimal impacts around the holiday season to all the businesses in the area. So big project. Another important connection, this is an east-west connection, would fit nicely with the project I was describing earlier, which is that north-south crossing of I-90, and would, because one thing that we know that Issaquah really would benefit from is stronger connections, both motorized and non-motorized, but the better we can connect our city, the easier it is going to be to get around. We have the advantage or disadvantages, as depending on how you look at it, having I-90 sort of bifurcate our city, cut right through the middle of it. So these projects that can make connections are really important, we think. And so here's...
I'm sorry, a quick question on
Yes.
on that last one. Where is that 13 million and change coming from, what is the funding, since we don't have what I guess you guys gave council that breaks apart every project and says where funding came from?
So that project is fully funded.
I know, I'm asking where that funding came from.
So it's I can give you the
Half
big.
came from Costco.
The big picture answer is that it's a joint agreement between the city and Costco.
Uh-huh. And that breakdown of that 13, Carl just alluded to, is it half? Is that what it was?
It's
Half came from the city?
The split is roughly 50-50 city Costco, yes.
Thank you.
And so this project, so this is making the east-west connections. We know that this next project, this is a weak link in our transportation network in this part of town. And so it makes sense to us if we are completing this project this year, that it would make sense to make this other north-south connection between, basically, one way we've thought about this is that this, see if I can point, so this 62nd project, this project here, the 221st project, and then the project that we were talking about over here in the vicinity of the
Yep.
state park can work together as a system. So, which is how we like to look at things rather than just piecemeal individually. So this is once this project, 60 seconds complete, want to be looking at this design and construction of this piece, and then also, as I mentioned earlier, over here. We know that it's disruptive enough to have one project going on in any one area. So our idea here is to phase these in some way so that we would build one, complete it, have the design complete for the next one, and then the third one. So that's the story there.
So for number 8 here, it looks like the project wouldn't begin for 2 years.
So
That's when it begins to be funded?
yeah, and so I have to have my funding thing.
4 years, pardon me, thank you.
Yeah, not till 2022.
4 years. So I'm curious about that distance. You're telling me that the 62nd Street is going to be finished, you're thinking come holiday time.
Right.
So this year.
Right.
And then why is there and you don't want to have an overlap, why is there that 4-year gap?
Well, let me go through all the projects, and then can we come back to that question?
Sure, sure.
That's a great question. I mean, we would like to have these
Currently, probably.
concurrently. We would like to do everything on this list. I would like to do everything on this list very quickly. Well, let me just go through the rest of the projects. I think that will help answer that question. And the short answer is it's a funding and it's a staffing constraints at this point. So if we had sort of unlimited staffing and unlimited funding, we could do unlimited work, I suppose. So anyway, that's the short answer.
Are we constrained or understaffed in your department?
Well, let me go through the projects first.
Okay.
And then you can tell me about. We have 3 senior engineers, and we have these projects that I'll be presenting to you. So you can maybe be the judge of that. Then we could supplement that work, of course, with consultants. So here's a project that is pretty exciting. This is a project that's been on the list for a while, I believe. This is to make improvements in the vicinity of the school, Central Park, along Northeast Park Drive. Interestingly enough, we've been doing some traffic calming work and neighborhood outreach with the Highlands, and this particular stretch of Park Drive along the school, and specifically the crossings, is a very high priority for the Highlands. And so this project, which originally I think was scoped as a signal at Central Park and Park Drive, we've expanded that scope a bit to look more at that Park Drive corridor, sort of a couple blocks each direction, so that we can better understand the whole piece of that rather than just signalizing the intersection and not worrying about the other issues there. So that's that project.
So in that project, are you considering a roundabout
And yes, we are considering a roundabout.
instead of a traffic signal where, what is that, Central Park comes into Park Drive?
That's still proposed to be a signal. We're looking at a roundabout. I think the location we're thinking about
The
a roundabout.
roundabout's probably a little bit farther back where College Drive comes
Yes,
into Central
that's, I
Park.
think, what
Okay.
we're looking at there. But the intersection of Central and Park Drive is still, we're planning for that to be a signal at this point.
Okay. It's very small.
So this is Front and Sunset. This project has been around for a long time. This is primarily the changes on this one, and there's different schools of thought on this one, but it has been a project on our list for some time. It is it's a concurrency required project. It's to put turn lanes on the east and west legs of Sunset. So right now, it's either you wait in one lane to make a left or go through.
6 years out.
And so this is to have a separate left turn and through lane on both legs of Sunset. It does, to do that, it's likely to require the removal of some parking there right near, sort of in the vicinity of the Rogue
Brew house.
Brew House,
Public
thank
house, yeah.
you. So there's a loss of parking. That's we understand that's challenging in our downtown where we are trying to maximize parking. But that's,
Speak to how far back that would go, like all the way to the fish hatchery?
and not that,
beyond-
it's just that.
Just gonna be
it's
the
just
strip
that
that's in front of the
short
public
walk.
house?
I don't think,
It'll
the
extend,
preliminary
yeah.
designs I've seen, it doesn't extend past that brew house. So it's a loss of, I want to say, 3 or 4 parking stalls, something on the order of that. I'm not saying that that's not significant, but it's a minimal amount of parking.
And so that, as a project, is one of the least expensive
It
in the
is.
ones that we're looking at in this 6-year period, but I would say goes down to one of those areas where we have the biggest traffic issues. I sure would love to know why that is in 2024 versus, something like the Central Park traffic signal, and I'm saying that as a Highlander, what the priority between those.
And this is exactly the reason why I'm happy to be here sharing this information with you, is to get that kind of input. Absolutely. So that's that project. And so now the Gilman Boulevard improvement. So this is we're starting on this effort, and I want to put a plug in for the outreach effort we're doing. There's a survey that's going online starting next Monday, I think. We'd like to encourage everyone to take a look at that and give us your input. We have some business outreach plans soon. We have an open house tentatively planned for July 11th. That's a Wednesday. So it's pretty exciting. We have a great consultant team working on this, and we're working very hard to take a multidisciplinary approach to this study. So it's not a transportation project. We're the lead, but it's not a transportation project only. It's parks and DSD and operations and emergency, police and fire. It's everyone looking at this together. It's a very dated corridor in the city. It's pretty much unchanged in its design and since the 70s, I think. Has a lot of driveways. I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but so that's been Gilman till now, and a big part of the work here is to plan for Gilman in the future and what that should look like.
What is that? So what is the improvements?
So
Again, since we don't have that packet in front of us.
Right. And again, I apologize for that. So this is preliminary design work and study work. So the work we're doing this year is just to understand, along with the community, what that future Gilman should look like. And then the next phase, which is scheduled for next year, I believe, and a bit into 2020, is to continue with that preliminary design work. So there is no construction project in the TIP for Gilman. And there's a couple reasons for that. One of the main reasons is we don't know what's going to come out of the study. So it may be, so at one extreme, it could be an entire corridor reconstruction that's a city capital project. More likely, it's likely to be a set of plans and designs that will be very useful as we go forward and approve development and redevelopment that comes in along Gilman. So, and there may be some spot improvements to fill in those gaps. So the city may be making some intersection improvements along Gilman as a result of this. We don't really know what the outcome is, but we know that without a plan and without a vision for that corridor, it makes it very difficult to approve redevelopment as it comes in, because we don't really know what we want. There's a lot of issues, access issues along that corridor, and it's a pretty high accident corridor because of so many driveways and so many conflict points, making it difficult to get across for pedestrians and other non-motorized uses. So there's a lot of value in this work. But to be
Did the
clear,
council order this study?
I'm sorry?
Did the council order this study of
The-
Gilman Boulevard? Or
Did they order? They approved the study.
they approved the study? But was this a request from staff or a request from council to look at it?
I think it was initiated at the staff level.
Okay.
And we explained all of what I'm sharing with you to council, and that made sense to them. So they funded this initial preliminary design work.
And this is separate from looking at the intersection at Juniper, Rainier, Gilman,
Yeah.
because that's already been funded.
Right, I don't think that includes that at all. This is different.
Yeah, this is.
So that's no longer on the TIP, right?
This is right. This is to look at the entire corridor and get clear about what that corridor should look like going forward.
So just going back to
Sure.
that idea, the Juniper, Rainier, Gilman intersection, I don't see that on the TIP.
You do. It's
Oh, 25?
Project 38, I think you're talking about the.
Oh, the Three Trails
Crossing improvements. I think, I think that is Juniper and Rainier and Gilman.
Crossing.
Okay.
It's I'm going to talk about that in a minute.
Okay.
That hasn't gone away. And so you're probably pretty familiar with our work on Newport west of 900. So we did a lot of preliminary work with the neighborhood, a lot of concerns along that corridor because of all the development that's happened out there. So we were very successful, I feel, in developing a plan that reflects what the community's interests are for that corridor. We are now, this year, working on moving forward with engineering design for that corridor. And if you look on your sheet, our plan is to design and build that project. It's not a cheap project either. Both of the Newports, make sure I tell you the right numbers.
2 years.
But they're both quite expensive. That Newport piece is about nearly 37 million. The other Newport, which we'll talk about in a minute, is nearly 30 million. We are working on getting as many grants as we can, but grants by themselves won't pay for those projects, obviously. But back to what I was saying earlier about connections, this is a really, we don't have a lot of key east, west, north, south connections, but certainly the two Newport projects are key east-west connections across town. So that's that Newport, and then here's the other Newport, which we are under design for right now, and that's from Maple to Sunset. So the project does stop. Was always intended, the grant money we received so far has been intended to stop at Sunset. There is some discussion about what this other piece here, whether we should continue with that other piece to take it all the way to Front Street. We're not doing that in this design, but the idea is out there. So that's that one. And then this is a misleading graphic. I'm going to apologize for. It's the project here, the TR28, is specifically, I believe it's $1 million, if I'm not mistaken, for the pinch point. And so that pinch point is this area right in here, roughly. And so if you're not aware of what's happening there, so WashDOT, as part of they're turning the shoulder into another travel lane along I-90, along this portion of I-90, and along with that work, they'll be putting in sound walls, and when they build the sound wall, they'll be building the sound wall in a location such that we will now have room for bike lanes and sidewalks in that very narrow part of Westlake Sammamish. So it's right in here. It's a small section. It's only, I want to say, less than 1,000 feet of improvements, but it literally is a pinch point. And so this whole community over here is challenged to get over to this part of town and get to the state park and all that. So it's an important piece that will make a significant improvement for mobility, especially non-motorized mobility for these folks. There is another project that is not in our 6-year plan that is another very expensive project. I think you see more towards the bottom of the list. that anticipates design and construction of this entire corridor, which would be a great connection, a great east-west connection on the north side of I-90. But that's another expensive project and out there.
Where is the funding for the pinch point coming?
For the pinch
Dollars?
point, that was already put aside by council, the $1 million.
Okay.
The specific source of that, I'm not sure if I can share with you, but I don't, because I don't know. But that $1 million, and that's specifically, so I think it's a good deal for the city. The state is doing the bulk of the work by moving that wall and giving us the extra space. They'll be providing us a gravel area, basically, when they're done, that we can kind of come back and do our design and our construction for reconstructing that portion of the roadway and the bike lanes and the sidewalk. So that's the $1 million, and we believe we can do that piece for the $1 million, but not, obviously, not the bigger chunk there. And then we've talked about this. I think you were mentioning what came up here. We've been talking about this. Certainly predates me here to say, but we are actually, so.
Next year.
Well, so the good news is we had either 95 or close to 100% plans here, maybe eight or so years ago, I think, something like that, and didn't have the funding to move forward with the construction. So we have, we're currently dusting off those plans. It's a fairly small engineering effort to bring those up to current standards, look at stormwater regulations, those kinds of things. But we'll have those plans ready to bid this year. So I think it's about a 4 to 6 month effort is what we're planning, and we're just getting started with that. So we would be ready with our plans for this year. It's, I think, a $6 million.
$6 million.
Roughly, yeah, $6 million project. And so that needs to go back to council for funding for that project. But we'll be ready to go with our plans here this fall. And that is, and just for those of you that don't know, that realigns those, or it aligns the two sides of Providence Point, which they're currently not aligned. And then this is a project that's been on our list for a long time. Actually, I was out of town for these discussions, the most recent discussions on this, but I think we've moved this up because that wall is not, it's not going to fix itself, as they say, and it's not, it needs some repair, and it needs some repair sooner than later. There was some talk, I think, of a possible development along this area here, a hotel or something. I don't think that we're going to wait for that to happen. I think there are repairs that we need to do. Now, I'm not a structural wall design engineer, but I'm being told that that's something that we can't neglect for much longer. So that's, I don't know if that's a transportation project per se, but it will allow us to keep Black Nugget Road operating safely by
Here's your 3 projects.
repairing that wall. And then so this is the project I think you were talking about. And so this is as you know, the developer is putting in a signal and making improvements on the north side of Gilman. And so, but they are not doing design or improvements on the south side of Gilman. And that's a kind of a complicated area that doesn't work very well. So we know that needs some thoughtful design to figure out how those streets come together and how especially the non-motorized uses will get through there safely. So that's the 3 trails crossing improvements. And then I think I just got a couple more. The East Lake Seminar Roundabout, we have a consultant study that recommends removing, I'll say this right here, removing the southbound, the second southbound lane on that roundabout and using it for pedestrian and non-motorized bicycle uses. So it won't impact the function of the roundabout for vehicles, but it will give us a much stronger and safer pedestrian connection through there. And then
Reduced to 1 lane? The roundabout will be
Yes.
one lane instead of
Yes.
two?
Yes.
Now, remember on the southbound, how there's a kind of side,
It's a
a lane
side,
that
right.
kind of goes to the side of it?
Yeah.
Then there's still
Bypass route,
two
that's-
lanes, yeah.
So that's the bypass thing.
Yeah.
It's that slip lane
I
bypass kind
never
of.
take, 'cause it's
It's
dangerous.
so hard to merge back in there. I think
Right,
that's a
so-
great idea.
So it's going to be gone. It's going to be,
Transition that,
the
yeah.
PEDs and bikes are going to take back that.
Great.
So those are the projects in the next 6 years. There's,
I have a question. We
Please.
haven't covered number 18, which is the camera system upgrade.
the ITS camera system upgrade, sure.
Yeah, can I hear a little bit more about what that is?
You can, so that's our intelligent transportation camera system throughout the city, and it helps us manage our signals and our signal system. And also it has other uses for safety, and the police sometimes use it for different events and that kind of thing. And they're not an expert on cameras and computer software, but basically they're 10-year-old. It's a 10-year-old camera, 10-year-old system, and it's hard to, they don't integrate very well with any of the new equipment, so it's an upgrade to that whole
So-
entire system. And I think it also includes new cameras, or more cameras as well.
Okay, and those cameras, the purpose of it is specifically to be able to help with timing of traffic?
Yes.
Okay.
And as I mentioned, sometimes there's times when emergency services have used those, if there's some
Right,
kind
to
of a.
change direct, yeah, sure.
If there's some kind of a, I don't know what, some protest or some kind of event that's happening in the city, the cameras are helpful for our police department, for example, to see what's going on at a specific intersection.
Surveillance,
Yeah.
I have a question
So,
on
yes,
the
sir.
I-90 crossing.
Yes.
We're holding off on the Holiday Inn 12th Avenue thing, waiting for the state to decide what they're going to do with the entrances to the park, correct? Or is that, I mean, they're
I
talking
don't-
about moving their entrance over there so that whole intersection change. That's not my question. The question is more on the I-90 overcrossing,
This one.
that one.
Right.
Are we holding off on that as well till we find out what, if anything, the ST3 terminal's going to be?
The short answer is no, not as we proposed it here. And the idea behind that would be, so again, we know Sound Transit's coming to Issaquah. We know it's, some 20 years out or less. But we also know that a crossing in this vicinity would be very advantageous, be very beneficial for the city. And we believe that the more work we can do on this, and the more certain we can be about where we want a crossing to be, and that will help inform that Sound Transit discussion. We wouldn't move forward with this work without a bunch of partners at the table. So Sound Transit would be in any kind of conversations that we have with this crossing, along with WashDOT and businesses along Gilman, a whole slew of folks. We're not just doing it
Yeah, I understand. My
unilaterally.
concern is that we're dealing 6 years out, and it's 20 years before
Right.
we're ever going to see a terminal.
Right, and so,
I hate to have them build something and find out that that's right where Sound Transit ultimately says we're going to tear it down so we can put in a train station.
that's good input. And so, and maybe I didn't describe this exactly accurately. This isn't, I don't think that we're saying that this would be the location of the Sound Transit station. What we're saying is there's a real advantage to us to have an additional crossing of I-90 in this area, and we know that Sound Transit's coming as well, and there may be opportunities for us to work together, but I don't think we're saying that this, just to be clear, we're not saying, and this is the location of the Sound Transit station.
I just want to make sure that
Yeah,
we're
because we haven't gotten that far
all the
yet.
players on the same table.
Yes, there's a lot of moving pieces.
Okay, thank you.
So along with the ITS camera system upgrade, are we considering any intelligent signaling updates?
Right.
Since those systems are also somewhere around 10 years old?
So not in this budget, not currently, but it's a good question. We've talked about it some, and there's some newer technology in signals. There's adaptive signal technology now. From our preliminary investigation into that, it doesn't seem like the cost would be worth the benefits. So it's not in here now, but it's not off the table. It's not, we haven't.
What is that rough cost that you would say it's not worth it?
So adaptive signals sort of start at $5 million and then up from there. And adaptive
Part of our
signal.
issue is that we've got pinch points beyond that.
Yeah,
that
I mean, there's some, so, and the other thing, just without getting into a lot of detail, the adaptive signals work well in the shoulder portions of a commute. They can make the corridors work more smoothly in the areas on either side of the peaks. But in the peak, when it's fully congested, an adaptive signal is not like a silver bullet that's going to make traffic flow. Unfortunately, it's not the silver bullet that will make traffic flow smoothly through town. So it's not, to be clear, it's not off the table. It's not, you don't see it here. It's not currently planned, but we've been talking about it, and there's, yeah.
There is one item that's number 41 that's below our line, but it's
Okay.
being funded this year. Can you speak specifically to what the Front Street streetscape is going to be done this year?
I can. So, yes, it's below the line.
Streetscape.
It's the second project below the line. So it's below the line for funding in the years starting with 2019. We do have funding, as you'll see, in 2018 there. So it's not below the line in that sense. We do have, we're currently working with Parks and planning, the folks downstairs, to come up with a scope of work. We're looking at Front Street between Sunset and Olde and making improvements there. This $156,000 that you see here, we don't think that's enough money to do everything that needs to be done in that block. Our idea would be that we would complete that block and do all the landscaping and the trees and everything that was envisioned in that work that economic development did for Front Street streetscape in that vicinity of Sunset to Olde. Our preliminary estimates are more than this. They're more like $400,000 to $500,000. So we need to finalize what that work is. We're in the process of finalizing what that work is, and then probably coming back to council for more money to do that. There's nothing in future years. There's currently nothing. There's no additional work for. There were some other elements in that. That work, that streetscape work, I know that there were, and those aren't currently in here.
So what are the next steps for any public that might be watching this, where the TIP goes from here, if they want to comment on their favorite or disliked transportation project du
Perfect.
jour?
That's a great question. So probably the best opportunities are so this is being discussed be a similar presentation to what I've shared with you next Thursday night at the Council Infrastructure Committee, which will be here in this room. So that's on the agenda for discussion with that group next Thursday, and then that's a less formal conversation at infrastructure. And I know that Mr. Ramos typically asks for public comment at that meeting. The formal public hearing where your comments are actually go into the record is June 4th in front of City Council. And, that depends on the volume of comments. That could be a one meeting type deal. If there's a lot of people, I've seen council continue those hearings to a second meeting. So we'll see how that goes. But those are the sort of the key check-in points for the public.
Anything else? Any other questions? I think so. Okay. Thank you.
Typically, PPC either gives like some things that you would like to see moved up or down or backwards, and we write a letter that he can take to council that you've looked at it and you've recommended things. If you choose not to, if you're fine with the way it is, that's fine too. I'm just letting you know that you have the opportunity to send a letter on with Kurt's TIP to council if you choose to. Just giving you that. You don't have to.
Lindsay, you talked about moving up the Front Street as
The Front and Sunset intersection,
Yeah,
I would
be
say.
a proponent. I think when we start thinking about a value add, being able to concretely see some actual work being done rather than, I'm not a big proponent of this Gilman Boulevard study that's being funded. When you look at them, they're basically apples to apples in cost. One we actually will be able to see an effect from, and one we're planning for a future, which you guys know we love to do up here. That's the point of what we do. However, I worry about at some point the plan. But we're spending money to implement a plan for something that's so far in the future. But by the time we get there, we're going to have another study of the current plan based on the new information that we have. I think it's actually way too early on to start talking about funding the Gilman Boulevard improvements the way they are right now. I would slip those by a few years because it's really not productive for us to be talking about a hard concrete plan and a study coming through. That being said, clearly council's funded it, and so it's going to happen. But to me, I would rather see something that's more concrete, like number 12, the Front Street and Sunset intersection.
exactly like Providence Point example.
Yeah.
That's been on here so long, and now all of a sudden this year we're having to spend, I don't see it now.
That's about $200,000.
Whatever amount of money to make sure it's up to current standards,
Yeah.
because there's been so much other growth in that intersection. We got to figure out how we're going to make that intersection work. I'm just happy to see that maybe next year it'll finally come to fruition.
I also don't know that this camera system upgrade should really be coming out of our transportation budget. I don't know that we're going to be getting the most benefit from it from a transportation perspective. I think that might actually be something that really falls under Health and Human Services, as far as it's really more for police and emergency vehicles. So I would wonder if then that amount of money could actually be spent on improving a corner and making an actual difference in transportation. So.
The other one that looks like it's fairly inexpensive and could have a big benefit for non-motorized transportation is the East Lake Sammamish Parkway roundabout modifications.
Yeah.
So that would be one I could see moving up and getting a benefit, particularly for bikers going through that area to improve their safety.
Okay. So those are, as Tricia mentioned, those are exactly the kinds of comments that we would welcome those comments from you. Those are helpful in shaping this for sure.
With us not getting approval from citizens for a tax increase to cover the different traffic things, I think it helps to actually have concrete things to show. When you have these big numbers, where you're looking at things, $90 million for, for these different things, it feels very abstract. But when you actually are interacting in a community and you're like, hey, it's much easier for me to turn onto this street, it's much easier for me to bike through the street, I think it really helps as far as building kind of future credit in a sense, because I'm sure there's going to be another point in time where taxpayers are going to be asked to foot the bill for these massive projects. And it really helps to have what seem like smaller projects. It makes a big difference in people's lives. And so I guess I would encourage having that kind of focusing on more smaller improvements that make a difference in everyday lives rather than maybe as big picture. Some years are big picture, some years are corners and blocks.
Yeah, I think what I hear you saying, and we've talked about this too, some obviously, is if there's low-hanging fruit, if there's smaller type things that, maybe they don't have a huge impact, but they do have some benefit, and they can be done relatively inexpensively and relatively quickly, I think is what you're saying.
Yeah, and you mentioned that corner, the Tully's T-Mobile. Costco has some offices back there on Lake Sammamish Parkway. Okay, I asked, when is the state going to be finalizing their decisions about where they want to be moving the entrances? Because it's at some point, we need to move on. That's a massive intersection that's used within our community. So it's all right, you need a year. We've entered into this agreement, that's fine, but that's why I asked about timeline, because what we don't want to have is have it be something 8 years down the road and we're still having that same intersection.
That's good input, thank you.
So the other two that I would just kind of put notes on, not necessarily move up, but with a Three Trails crossing, I would really want to make sure that whatever we're getting out of the developer there at that light is able to be used by the money that we're spending, so that there isn't too much of a disconnect between those two projects.
You lost me there a little bit. Can you?
So with the Three Trails crossing improvements, the developer is obviously making improvements to the north side of the
Yes.
street. I just want to make sure we don't lose the benefits of those by pushing the south side of the street improvements way later.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Great. That's
And then the second one, I have major concerns about the Black Nugget Road retaining wall.
Yeah.
And I would just, I think, well, $2.8 million is not chump change. It's also a whole lot less than we would have to spend if something
hillside slide.
catastrophic happens.
And it won't, that 2.8, to my understanding is that doesn't do anything like rebuild that wall. It's
Patch.
keeping it
patch.
functional.
Yeah. So I have major concerns with that and would like to know kind of who in the city is in charge of that and kind of what monitoring is happening there so that we know whether or not that money needs to be spent yesterday or 3 years from now.
Right, and I would encourage council to explore if this is the cost of a patch, what is a rebuild, what do we need, and to really encourage that being a way to, a place to divert funds.
Yep.
To.
Great.
I don't know, Trish, do you get enough information to
like-
figure out what we need to do?
Yes, I have it all here.
Okay.
If I don't, Susan does.
You want opinions, we got them.
Now we're ready.
Thank you very much for your time and your input. It was great. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So are we taking any public comments even though it's not a public hearing? Okay. Just making sure.
Or next week.
Yep.
CIC.
Last but certainly not least,
Hometown.
not sure what Kristen's going to tell us other than we're going to open it and continue it.
And I feel like I'm starting to sound like a broken record. I think this is our third time in a row to talk about this. Let's see. Oh, my word. There we go.
I loved how when the YouTube video was up, one of the side was like, Councilman goes, sorry, what is this?
Trish?
Top of the line, PPC Old Town? No?
Yeah, maybe. No? It was on the R drive. Huh. Shoot. Trish? She's not listening. I double checked it. It was on the R drive. It's not here. It's not here.
You're in 217.
I know. I was trying it just in case.
Can you sign in as yourself? Would it be on your computer?
I think so. Yeah, it would. Yeah. I apologize. It's not just under there. No. Okay. That's okay. Well, there may be nothing to see anyway. We'll see. Okay.
This is the R drive, right?
It's the R drive, and I checked. It was on the R drive.
Right, yeah,
You checked too?
no, I didn't,
Oh.
I just checked those today.
Well, it's not on the website.
No, because it's in our own
Mm-mm.
places. Well, you could,
I can talk through it.
you can mention the email. That's all I can remember that was new.
Okay.
Could you do the presentation from April to kind of point out any areas of changes?
Not
We're just
really.
going to continue anyway, so I'm not sure what we're...
Okay. Well, okay, tell you what. I remember most of it, and I have a hard copy in my hand.
You do the flip thing?
That might work.
You just go, why don't you just go with how you're going to, because it's almost mine.
I was just going to say it. I was just going to walk through it. So fortunately, you all have, I apologize. Fortunately, you all have seen this 2 or 3 times before this. So just as a brief history for the public, you all made a recommendation to City Council back in April of 2017. It went to Council to 3 different Land and Shore meetings and eventually was remanded back to PPC because we felt there were so many changes to the original document that you recommended that it needed to be reseen and reheard again. So the major changes that took place were, I'm gonna look at my notes, it was abbreviated. So there was more history, more background, there were some more maps, and the policies were just longer, and there was an objective or discussion with most of the policies. A lot of that was removed, but having cross-referenced the document that you originally recommended and the new document, we felt that the policies that needed to be there were still there. And when I asked you all this a few meetings ago, you all concurred that that was the case. Since then, we've made a few changes. We were more specific on the treasures, and we referenced the comprehensive plan. Another big change that took place was that we added an action program. And as you all looked closely at the action program at our last meeting and the meeting before, and we rearranged some things, we added some things. I think probably the most significant change that was made was that we requested that City Council find a consultant and/or staff to do a fiscal study to determine the best funding to implement the downtown streetscape plan. I think that was the biggest piece that was in there. One thing that I wish I could show you tonight, although I can't, is a map. We needed to include a map, and we need to determine what that map needs to be. So in our plan, we need to have a land use designation map. We need to have that one. Is there anything else that you all want in it? And there were 2 gray fuzzy areas. Both of those indicated boundary discussions that need to take place. One was at the very south where you had the tooth that jogs down there south at the high school. And you asked me why the jog was there. There is no sewer there. And that is likely why that jog was there in the first place. Now, it's all in the city, so I don't know that it matters if it's there or not. So you can change that boundary. And the other one is up north, Route 10. We need to look at not only confirm that we want the boundary to include the Route 10 area, the old Route 10, but also we need to figure out eventually what the land use designation needs to be. Is it going to be a retail, because right now it's in a different designation than CBD. CBD is in a retail one, and destination retail is in mixed use. So we need to figure out discussions, and this is something to think about over the next month and during the tour, what we want that land use to be, because that will determine the zoning as well. So there were gray areas on that map that I submitted to you that you all got in your packets.
So the zoning still needs to be figured out, but not the boundary? We've already decided on the boundary, I
We've
thought.
pretty much decided on the boundary. Part of the tour is just to confirm it.
Sure.
Right.
Not the tour-wise, but as a body, I thought we had basically decided on the boundary. We just haven't decided on the zoning.
Correct. And I think the northern boundary was confirmed. The southern boundary was not, because you wanted more information, so we need to look at that as well.
We wanted to see
whether
it.
that includes the notch or whether it goes all the way up to Darth Street. So we'll figure that out. Okay, so that needs to be discussed. And then if there are any other maps that you all went in there, then we need to know that as well. But land use has to be there. There is one issue that you need to think about that for the next meeting where we talk about this, is that we got an email today that talked about the fact that there are formula businesses, also known as chain stores, such as, say, Domino's or Subway or Lazy Boy, that are coming into Old Town. And the discussion in the email was, is there a way to either restrict that or control how many come in, or control what it looks like once it comes in? Different cities do it different ways. So I don't know if that's something you all want to consider including in the plan. a proposed, oh, I didn't print it up. A proposed policy may say, consider, the
Since we
restriction
have
of these.
counsel here, does he have an opinion on?
I don't know. Do you have an opinion?
He's working on something else.
Do you have an opinion?
Since we have you here, you
Yeah,
wouldn't believe how many meetings we have.
This is
where we're like,
unusual
I
for us. We're going
wonder
to take
what
advantage
counsel
of
would
you while you're
say.
here.
Happy to help.
So the email that came through, we had a resident talk about potentially restricting
Or prohibiting.
chain stores or, franchises. And the
Specifically in-
discussion wasn't in Old Town. We just were opening it up to Old Town, but the discussion happened to be on Front Street where this was happening. And I know that there are other cities that do it. It's required to go through double review, and they restrict what they can really do as a franchise there. Or there are some areas that say you can only have stores that are, less than 75,000 square feet or 25,000 square feet. Are there legal issues that you would see
Sure.
with that?
As far as I'm concerned, that's just a straightforward application of the city's zoning power. As long as you have a rational, reasonable, justifiable basis for imposing a restriction like that, whether it is consistency with the surrounding areas, buffering concerns, aesthetics can play a significant role. As long as you build a significant or a reasonable legislative record that shows that you are imposing a restriction like that for a rational, reasonable basis, typically you can't be successfully second-guessed. So I think that the devil in the details is really how you justify it. Does that answer your question?
That does, thank you.
Sure.
So it's something to think about over the next couple of weeks and just drive her in and on our tour. That might be something that you all want to consider.
Does staff have an opinion about that? I think of, like, for instance, the Highlands was originally envisioned to be something that had more of a mom and pop feel. And the Highlands ended up attracting a lot of chains. And the community has had displeasure with it, but on the other hand, you get what you get. If that's who's moving in and that's who's paying, that's what you have. So I think it's a very interesting discussion specifically for Old Town when we think about keeping the character and the nature and using this opportunity to really push what we want it to be. So it would be nice if when we think about what we want, staff does the same and comes back with us with, depending on, I understand the question of what do you guys want, but it would be nice to see if you guys are like, we want to do this, just in Old Town, we see this being all the way through Issaquah, all the way, into the core. I'm doubting you're going to say that, but, it would be nice to have staff have a edging one way or the other.
Right, and being that we just got this email this afternoon, we haven't formed an official opinion, but did do some looking into it. And there are some things that I found that were kind of interesting, such as, the business has to do, at least 51% of the business has to interact with customers. You don't want necessarily, if you're trying to create a pedestrian-friendly downtown that's going to bring people there, a dental office isn't always going to do that, or some big box isn't going to be what you want there with that interaction, that street interaction.
I would want to see some other examples of cities that have done that and how they have restricted it location-wise. My other concern would be particularly for the Old Town area and the fact that they do not have a grocery store. I would not want to restrict a chain grocery store from being able to come in there if for some reason Front Street Market property became open once again or something like that in that area to support that community.
Okay. I will come back with examples. All right, so I apologize that somehow it's not on here. But I think really that's what I had. I was going to go through just the goals, not the policies. See if you all had any heartburn, but being that we've already been through it 2 meetings prior to this.
I was remiss to miss the last meeting, and when going through what you guys had done, I had a little bit of a different takeaway that was not popular. So I wanted to voice that to you, and it was specifically regarding the Front Street streetscape plan.
Okay.
And everybody was like pretty gung-ho about how do we get funding and how do we move forward? Let's find this so that we have it, we can make it happen. I felt like there are some changes that are happening and that are still happening that are very relevant to that streetscape plan. So for instance, the inclusion of doing the old Route 10 boundary, you know, Connie had mentioned maybe that should be the festival street. And I thought that was a very interesting comment. It doesn't necessarily mean that we don't make those changes to Alder, but I think that it does actually change the way that we could envision Old Town's kind of facelift. And so the idea of being like, we're hard pressed into this plan, I don't see it as being hard baked, I guess is what I'm thinking. And so everyone was kind of like, yeah, let's move forward and push this through and do as much as we can, and we're really excited to implement it. And I almost kind of think that there's a reason that when we have the funds, then we kind of can figure out what we want to do, rather than this concept of this is what we're doing and let's move forward, because it may not be the best situation for us when we actually get to doing it. And I worry that we're going to be focusing on something that if we're not even able to implement this 6 or 8 years down the road, there may be a better plan then. You know, the design work that we've done is good, but is that going to be the right thing for when we actually start breaking ground? Does that make sense?
It does. When the plan was done, Gilman was not considered to be a part of Old Town, so the study didn't go up that far north. So perhaps, and there's not much you can do as far as right-of-way and bike lanes go. You know, this was really, the plan deals mostly with the sidewalks and the pedestrian feel and the trees, and not so much where cars and bikes would go, because there's not much you can do there. So it's part of this is a result of stormwater projects that have been happening. But point being, most of this, there probably won't be better plans. Not that this one's perfect, but there won't be better plans. However, there is still the potential of moving the festival street from Alder to Gilman. So maybe, based on what you're saying, suggesting just pulling those two pieces out of the plan for now until the fiscal study is done, for the rest of it is done, and then maybe evaluate those two possibilities at a later date.
And then I know that this is kind of a broken record because I just happen to disagree with it, but the plan that we had seen previously when we originally passed it, before it was brought back to us, of that Front Street, Sunset Way redesign of how all crossings, I strongly disagreed with that as being a resource allocation.
Right.
And so I think that there are some things that money would be better spent in than, for instance, that particular part of it, so.
Right. So what wound up with that was that council just approved I think it was about $5,000, just to even do a feasibility study to see if that's something that would even work there in the first place. So I think knowing whether or not that is even really a feasible possibility is worth leaving in there.
So to Joy's point, I think you could kind of segment down some of the ideas that were presented in the Front Street Streetscape Plan as separate concepts, in that I wouldn't want to push off the pedestrian improvements and the addition of the street trees back and things like that that can make that a much more usable area, particularly because as we get distance from the plan, then maybe somebody wants to have to study it again. I don't want that to have to happen. But given the idea that we could consider either a different area for a festival street or a second
one,
themed festival street, I think that could be a discussion that's worth having.
Yeah, I think as we grow, and I think what we envision from the community, I think that using Old Route 10 could be something really fantastic.
There's so much room there, and they already use it for the car shows.
Yeah.
Yeah. So does the first thing I said kind of work then, leaving in the pedestrian pieces and the crossing pieces, but then potentially pulling out the Alder piece?
Things that are already so
Right.
far out. It's not
Okay.
that I want to delay doing the festival street. I think a lot of people are really excited about it. I love the potential of it. I think that what the disconnect is that for things that are already pushed out, not making that a priority necessarily for the feasibility study.
Okay.
Financial, does that
Okay.
make, I don't know if that makes sense.
No, that does make sense. So, so don't worry about doing, when we do the fiscal study, don't worry about doing, say, Dogwood to Gilman right now, because that one's not even in, yeah.
It doesn't even have, yeah,
So
it's-
maybe look up through Alder or through Dogwood for those pieces.
Yeah.
And then leave out the rest of it.
Yeah,
for now.
basically phase one,
Okay.
phase one, you know, but
Yeah.
that was my takeaway.
That makes sense. Do you all, we can talk about it more later, but do you all concur before I go and make
I
this
could
change?
go either direction on them. I think my priority is the pedestrian zones.
Okay.
I'd love to see the Alder Festival Street move forward, but to me, that's secondary.
Okay.
Funding issue as always.
Yep.
Yes.
Also, one other thing may seem small. I love getting the feedback that we had from the open houses. And I don't know if maybe these people were specifically asked if we could share their thoughts, but maybe in the future, blacking out their names.
Are their names all on there?
Their names are on it.
Oh, I
yeah,
didn't put this together.
Because it's just basically a photocopy of their filled out forms
Okay.
and their comments. And so maybe they gave permission and it's fine, but maybe in the future, maybe
Yeah.
just showing that info a little differently. It's not a big thing, but I just wanted to mention that.
I did find that very valuable to not only see how the room was set up and kind of the images of the pictures of putting the dots in the different areas to give a sense of the data, and then also the individual comments was
Yeah.
very nice.
Especially, I mean, you get that, I love that from that dot perspective. I think that gives it really
Yeah.
helps to kind of see a cross-section of how the group was feeling. But also, it was nice that you gave people the opportunity to just be like, what are your comments, rather than needing to align specifically to a thing. I know I'm going to, again, beat one of my dead horses, which someone made a comment about. I wish the Issaquah School District had a better attitude or wanted to change the way they saw things. And I was like, yeah, because that's how I feel often, is that I wish that they would see that there's a new way to do things, rather than building schools how we built them 20 and 30 years ago. We can do it better. And so I appreciated that the way you guys created that forum. It was a space that people felt free and comfortable to be able to talk about the community, which is really what we always want to see.
Yeah.
Good.
I really liked the if you had one wish, what would you do? That really forces somebody to kind of think through, no, this is what's important to me.
It does. It does. So our next steps, we do have public here, but our next steps are on May 24th, we're doing the tour. And we will post, like we did with Central Issaquah, our tour stops and approximately what time we will be there, so that the public could let us know if they're going to be joining us as well. And then on June 14th, that is the set date for the continuation of the public hearing. And we will bring back any of these changes. We'll have discussion about the boundaries and the land use, final discussion about policies, and then hopefully make a recommendation that day.
So now I have to open it up for public comment, but since we don't have a quorum, we will continue it.
Right, and it is continued anyway. I think that's posted in the paper.
Say they'll continue to June 24th.
To June 14th.
14th at 6:30.
Okay.
Date and time certain.
I know.
You need to, if you want to take public comment, because it's advertised tonight as the beginning of the public hearing.
So we want to take public comment from anybody who is
Right.
willing to give it today, and then we're also going to continue the public hearing to June 14th.
And we'll continue public hearing on June 14th as well.
Right.
But the public is here because it was advertised as a public hearing, so
Right.
we open it up to them.
Okay, I'm not sure what we're... I guess, Steve, if you have some comment, we're willing to hear it from you. Although it doesn't count since there's not a quorum.
Well, no, it does count.
It
It goes
does count?
it goes onto the record, at the very least.
I want to hear what Steve has to say.
Thank you, I appreciate that. So actually, I'm going to step back a step. Process-wise, I don't understand the TIP discussion, having a public forum but not taking public input. Process-wise, that just seems wrong and backwards to me. I think that should be revisited. That said, moving that part of the discussion, the TIP, the Old Town, the plan going forward, we're looking at intersections in the Old Town that have failed and have been failed for a long time. And we're talking about adding density to the area. And we're talking about a TIP that maybe is looking at the Front Street Sunset construction isn't going to be looked at until 2024. Even a broader picture, I think you need to look at where and why we approve development and don't have a plan for improving transportation, and why that's not part of the discussion. I don't think you can not link those things together. So that very much needs to be part of the discussion. There's so much I would say about Old Town. And another process question, I guess I came expecting to see part of that discussion presented. And I know it's no fault of staff or anybody else that we're not able to view that. To me, that I don't know that that counts as a public discussion or a public forum if that isn't reviewed publicly for the one person, I guess, who decided to stay for that. So process-wise, I think that needs to be looked at further. I'll reserve any substantive comments on the Old Town piece until having a more presentation of it or a chance to review it. I won't take any more time tonight to do that. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments from the public ahead of the continuation till what date?
June 14th.
June 4th?
14th.
14th.
Yep,
My apologies. Okay.
at 6:30 PM.
6:30 PM. Please come, there will be a raffle.
No promises. Yeah.
In that case, we'll adjourn the meeting at 9:12.
Okay.
Thank you both for sticking around.
Okay, happy to.